Let's go over the mythic changes coming to Manaforge Omega Raid in World of Warcraft 11.2 Ghosts of Koresh. Starting off with the Plexus Sentinel. Now, regularly throughout Phase 1, he sends the death wall down through the chamber, and you're going to need to position yourself to be able to use the reshii wraps to teleport through it, making sure you don't accidentally teleport into the unsafe sections past the current blocking walls. This is going to require some positioning changes. Have your team move away and towards the back of the room as this wall comes so they can reshii wrap through it, and making sure you have a little bit more room to be able to reposition yourselves and do your teleports based off where you're putting your arcs down on the ground. The 2-shot eradicating salvo now has an additional mechanic where if it fails to hit 5 targets, it does a blast of 16 million damage. So you definitely need to do the group 1, group 2 split and make sure you have everybody in their appropriate groups going in and taking the soak. You're no longer able to just cheese this with the Death Knight that can just stand there with Death's Advance. Finally, in the intermission phases, 2 new mobs spawn, overloading attendants. These things are going to begin casting a spell, which didn't seem to matter too much because when the death wall comes along and touches the adds, they explode for massive raid-wide damage. Your team needs to coordinate to get these mobs and burn them down fast. In the PTR, they were grippable, so having a Death Knight pull them together and being able to nuke them down quickly, and then run through the labyrinth of death themes and bubbles to get to the boss on the other end. He has a lot more health, and you're going to be going through 2 and maybe even 3 of the intermission phases. Past the 3rd intermission is a hard wipe because there's nowhere left to go. For Loom'ithar, there are now infusion pylons. The 4 pylons around the room can begin pulsing with energy and then sending an electric beam towards the boss. If this makes contact with the boss, he does pulsing AoE damage to the raid. Players need to stand in this beam, receiving damage over time, and a stacking debuff that increases the damage taken. You're going to need to coordinate team members to stand in the beam as you're dealing with the collapsing web wall. Once a hole has been broken in the wall, somebody needs to run around the outside edge and pick up the beam so the player on the inside of the collapsing wave can make their way over to the safe point and get out of the trap. This is going to start with 1 beam charging into the boss, and the next set it's going to have 2, and then 3, and so forth. This adds a lot of damage and a lot more positional management to the fight. You're going to want to mark the general areas of the pillars and call for players to go and soak at specific markers. We found it pretty reliable to allow range to first pick up the beams as the tanks do the tank mechanic to break the weaving layer. Then the tanks go pick up the beams as the DPS focus on getting the web weave destroyed and making the path to safety. The tanks can slowly collapse in on the boss until players are able to break up a safe path and run around. Then new players pick up the beams on the outside edge and allow the tanks to get themselves to safety. There was a lot of damage, and letting one of these beams hit the boss was brutal. The tank mechanic also ramped up in damage big time from heroic to mythic, requiring a mandatory defensive cooldown for every blast on the tanks. There are 2 changes to Phase 2 on Mythic. If the cone effect doesn't hit at least 5 targets, the boss gets a big defensive shield that's going to take your team a lot of work to be able to break through to get back to DPSing the boss. You're going to run out of space before you kill this boss if you ever let them get the shield, so you're going to make sure to have 5 people absorbing each of the different waves. The second change is while the boss is knocking targets back, it's going to affect everyone with a purple circle. When the effect ends, all players with the circle are going to erupt for AoE damage. This means there's going to have to be a decent amount of room to be able to spread out around the boss when she begins the knockback mechanic, and this is going to force you to use up the floor space a lot faster as you're going to need to move the boss more regularly and for further distances. This definitely becomes a Lust in Phase 2 and Burn Down style encounter. Soulbinder Naazindhri. The first change is that each of the different canisters are protected from being destroyed by her orbs, unless they get hit by one of the Dark Stars. When players get the Dark Star effect on them, they need to position themselves in such a way that one of their stars hits the canister that you want to be destroying. This was a pretty simple coordinate your team to have a particular point to stand on, and then erupt the stars so that they hit the canisters. There's a new effect on the star that if it hits a player, it not only now reduces their movement speed, but it also drastically reduces their haste. You do not want to get hit by stars, so you want to have a coordinated point for star people to go, as well as to make sure that the rest of the group is able to get away from that location. After the chambers are hit by stars, you're then going to get the regular detonation mechanic and get access to the mobs. When the boss does his arcane expulsion, knocking everybody back, wherever you land, you're going to drop a puddle. This is now going to use up quite a bit of space you have in the room. You're going to want to coordinate your team to all be on the same side of the boss and to be knocked in the same direction, landing in an area that you don't intend to use for the rest of the fight. Coordinating knockback order is going to be important, and you're going to want to line these up around the outsides of the room. A single player out of position during this really ends up being a problem. You get a lot of puddles all around the room, and it's going to start devastating your team as the boss gets low HP and you start running out of spaces players can go. Now for the intermission. When all of the ads spawn, each of them gets a new special ability. The assassins are going to mark targets with blue circles. After delay, this erupts in damage around them, so these players that get marked need to get away from everybody else while you're trying to AoE down the mobs. You don't want to go too far to make sure that the mobs still return back to the group quickly enough they can continue to be burned down. The Shadow Mages have a new ability. If they're ever interrupted by any means, this could be stuns, grips, anything like that, their next cast is increased by 50%. Eventually, these things are going to be spamming out Void Burst AoEs and they're going to wipe out your party. You need to make sure to either keep them completely CC locked down as you're burning them down, or to do no CC and allow them to have the longer cast times. It's going to depend on your ability to handle the ambushers and phase blade damage based off how you're going to want to CC these mobs. Now the phase blades have the real problem. Every second they gain 7% increased damage. They're going to quickly become an unmanageable problem for your tanks and are going to be shredding your entire team if they're allowed to live. It's still going to be big time focusing down these phase blade first as priority, then taking out the mages, and finally the assassins. And you're going to have to figure out how your team is going to use CC and other abilities throughout this phase. Because you lose so much more access to the room so quickly with the knockback and puddles, you're going to have to eventually give up certain canister areas that you're never going to be able to break. You want to make sure to plan out and use that entire side of the arena for knockbacks first, and then give up on breaking those canisters and just break the ones on the other side of the room. Eventually, you're going to run out of some on the side that you want to be dealing with, but that's just something you're going to have to deal with as you lose space. Forgeweaver Araz now protects his floating orbs that are moving towards the collectors. Each of these is going to have a shield on them that reduces the damage they take and makes them immune to crowd control effects. He's now also going to create void tears around the room. These tears will deal massive damage to anybody within them, but also if any of the orbs go through the void tear, they lose their defensive properties. You're going to have to coordinate your team when they get the markers, paying attention to where the lines from their markers go to which canister. And players have to stand in a way that these void tears are between them and the canister that the orbs are going to move towards. The entire team should be on the other side of the void tear, waiting for the orbs to come through so they're now vulnerable and easily burned down. Of course, the Arcane Echo has way more health now and is guaranteed to be able to get off its channeling into the other collector, which means there's a lot more of those moving zones throughout the field that players have to move around for, and you're going to lose a lot more damage just to movement. In the intermission, the new effect is that if one of the canisters is destroyed, it starts pulsing 10.5 million AoE raid damage to the entire party. This means that all 3 canisters have to die at the same time. If you let 2 of these pulses go off, it's going to be a raid wipe. So you need to coordinate your team, splitting them up to the 3 canisters and burning all 3 down at the same time. You also have that same limit to them gaining up energy, getting to full energy and exploding on the raid, which is also pretty close to a raid wipe. So you have to be very high DPS and very coordinated for burning down these pillars. You are going to get 2 of this phase, so you cannot rely on Lust and the increased damage from that to make sure you get the canisters down. In the final phase, when he tears open the Singularity, he also knocks all players back away from him. If you're on the side of him towards the Singularity when this knockback occurs, you get flung into it and immediately die. All players need to make sure that they're on the door side of the boss when he enters into this phase to make sure you're knocked towards safety instead of towards death. Then throughout this phase, with the regular pull-in and all the other mechanics, you're now also dealing with the new star effects that are protected and new void surges that are going to exist throughout the room, and you need to make sure that when you're delivering your stars, they're between the Singularity and one of these void surges. This is a really intense phase that's definitely going to require Lust. The strength of the pull on all players is going to increase based off the inverse of the boss's health, so you're going to want to possibly Lust a little bit later in the fight to make sure you're burning him when the pull is at its strongest and you're about to wipe. The Soul Hunters each get their own special ability and a new intermission ability on Mythic difficulty. And Darius is going to create Shadow Scythe versions of himself that appear behind players and then cleave in front of them for big damage. You have to be paying attention to these ghostly images appearing and quickly move out of the area. For Valarin, you're going to have to deal with 2 different things. First, the I-beam effect now also amplifies the damage of her Fellblade that she casts at the end of I-beams. The tank slot mechanic now has to happen a lot faster, and you need to make sure to taunt Valyrian while she is eye beaming, so that when she finishes it and executes on her Fellblade, she Fellblades towards you instead of towards the ally that just got singed. Along with that, when she casts the Hunt, she's going to cast it 3 separate times in a row, and she's going to mark players that get hit by it with a debuff that increases the damage you take from it a second time by 500%. You now have to split your raid up into 3 groups and coordinate where your groups are going to stand every time the hunt goes out. You need this to hit at least 5 targets, and of course you're going to have those heroic rings around you when you're in it, so you can't be directly clumped up while you're within the beam. Fast coordination and quick spreading out for this ability is extremely important, while dealing with all the other effects. Finally, Alyssa is now going to occasionally cast Sigils of Chains, usually just before the hunt gets cast. And when she does this, all players are going to get pulled into the location of the tank that currently has threat on her. You need to be preparing for this and making sure that tank is in a safe spot for the entire team to get pulled to, and then quickly spread out for the hunt. All players affected by this also receive a 50% movement speed decrease, so you're going to need some way to remove snares from your allies, or you're just going to have to deal with the increased slow as people are spreading out. We found it is extra important in Mythic here to make sure that the pools are taken care of very quickly, and that the squad is at a location that the pools aren't going to affect them as drastically. It's a lot harder to make sure you're following Andaris all over the place, and you're going to want multi-dotting and cleaving to occur as often as possible, and to have a lot of focus on getting extra damage to Andaris whenever he's in the air phase of the intermissions. Speaking of intermissions, in every intermission there is the new effect Soul Tether. A group of 3 players are going to become tethered together, one player becoming tethered to 2 others. If any player within this tether chain moves more than 12 yards apart, it'll pull their tethered target towards them and them towards the tethered target. This means that as you get linked up in a squad of 3, you're going to have to coordinated move around the boss, reacting to the effect of this particular intermission as a group, and you can't just run off and do your own thing. We saw some really devastating things with this effect, like Death Knights using Death Advance so they can't be moved, running around and dragging their teammates around with them, completely ignoring their allies' safety. So make sure you're not using drastic movement speed increases in this phase, and do coordinate well with your team, moving around with the central player most likely. This Mythic effect is the same on all 4 of the intermissions, so you just have to now deal with whatever effect it is that the boss is doing while being tethered and being yanked around. There is so much going on in this fight, and this is an optional boss. You don't actually have to fight the Soul Hunters to begin progressing through the dungeon. I think a lot of teams are going to skip out on this, but the rewards are pretty good, so we're not really sure. Fractillus adds 2 new Mythic effects. First up, every time he does his tank effect, it's now going to create 3 walls instead of 1. This means that whichever lane the tank is dealing with is going to quickly build up on walls and need a lot more focus of your player's attention to break down. Also means that the 2 tanks can't just sit in the corner and deal with their mechanics over there, and are actually having to deliver their walls all over the place and having a more coordinated effort to break the walls that the tanks drop. In addition to this, there is a new type of wall. The 3rd and 4th wall in every row is now going to be a brittle wall. When these walls are destroyed, it puts a stacking debuff on all players in the raid based off how many brittle walls got destroyed. From what we found on the scaled 690 item level, a break of more than 2 walls was a quick raid wipe, with 3 million damage per second going out on everybody. It was too much for the healers to be able to manage, especially with the heroic circles going on, making sure that you cannot actually just stack up and heal through it. You had to stay separated and deal with all that damage. The order of breaks and your plan for how you're going to handle each of the different rows changes pretty drastically now going into Mythic, where it was pretty simple on the heroic and normal versions. What we found was stack 2 sets of walls in 4 of the lanes, and have the tank drop their 3 walls in a separate lane. On the first knockback, make sure to get knocked back and destroy all of the heroic walls and some of the normal basic walls on row 1, not destroying any of the walls down the tank line. You now have to quickly heal up from the increased damage from those heroic walls, but it should be enough to manage. In the next set, you're going to want to stack 2 walls at the location that the tank stacked their 3, and then you're going to want to stack the remaining walls in the empty spaces, making sure again you just get to the heroic level. The tank then has to go to their final empty spot and stack their 3 walls there. This now loses that entire row that the tank had first deposited at. You're now going to have 5 walls there, and you can't put another wall at that location. You've now just sacrificed that area and got a lot of free walls just taken off the platform. From here, you really have to coordinate getting knockbacks and making sure that you're only destroying 1 or 2 mythic walls per session, and you have to slowly accept losing entire zones. You're going to keep coordinating which zone you're going to build up extra walls at, and that you're not going to do any knockbacks towards, while making sure that you get as coordinated of knockbacks as possible to make sure you don't break too many mythic walls. By the very last phase of it, it should be pretty tight as you're stacking the final set of walls at the final row and getting entire wall sets dropped on the party, but you should be able to burn this boss down before you run out of space. Nexus-king Salhadaar on Mythic difficulty has a lot going on. The damage ramps up so drastically. At the item level that we were at on the PTR, we weren't able to get very far just because the damage was just too high for anybody to be able to survive. But here's the changes. Throughout the first phase, if you get the last stack of the Oathbound Decree removed from you, a ghostly version of you is going to appear and quickly dash at you. You have to rotate your character to face towards the incoming ghost before it hits you, or you get your stacks back. Getting your stacks back is an instant wipe pretty much because now you're guaranteed to get mind controlled and it's just going to be a bad time. In phase 2, the portals no longer go on to players. Instead, they spawn around a coordinated point in the center of the room. 6 of these portals open up and will first begin channeling towards the center of the arena, all blasting the same location in the middle. This goes all the way through and blasts through the portal on the other side, so there are 6 quadrants of safety around the outside of the room the players can stand in. The tank is going to have to be standing in one of those locations, and the rest of the raid team should be in a different spot. Because of the boss Dragon Breath effect, you don't want anybody else in the tank's lane. In addition, the beams and the Dragon's Breath effect stack the tank mechanic on any targets that take damage from them. This effect makes you detonate for raid-wide damage based off any damage that you took from these abilities. A player getting hit by the beams from the portals or from the breath from the dragon, other than the active tank that doesn't have the Cosmic Maw tank debuff on them, is going to annihilate the party. So you need to make sure only the primary tank takes the effect from the dragon and nobody gets hit by anything else. After the first set of beams, then each of the portals are going to face their beams outwards, split them, and begin opening them up Pac-Man style. Your entire raid team has to quickly move from the outside area of safety towards the center of the arena, which creates kind of a hexagram safe spot in the center. After that final bit, it then enters into the intermission and you can go over to the side platforms. In the intermission phase, the Shadowguard Reapers get a new ability. They'll mark a target with an arrow, and after delay, launch themselves towards that target, hitting the first target between them and that player. This is going to deal massive damage to that target. As well, the Nexus Princes on each platform get a huge Twilight Barrier on them, that's equal to 50% of their maximum HP. You need to point these Shadowguard Reapers at the Nexus Princes and have them eat the dash. This is going to deal significant damage to the barrier, and is going to be mandatory to successfully kill the Princes before the end of the phase. This requires a lot more player coordination and is going to be a lot spicier on where players are standing. It's going to get complicated as you're rotating around the room with the beams, but you're going to have to make sure you get coordinated with your teams putting this dash through the Nexus Prince. Nothing changes in Intermission 2, and this is definitely the lust point. Because the boss heals for any remaining health on the dragon, you're going to want to get as much damage in while it's taking 100% increased damage to be able to burn it down low enough that the boss doesn't heal too much. It's unlikely you're successfully going to kill this dragon on the Mythic difficulty, but you need to get it as low as you can. That leads us to the final phase, which is going to be a big problem. First up, if any of the orbiting dark stars touch each other, it's a raid wipe. So when the Galactic Smash goes out, you have to coordinate each of your players to go stand in a specific orbit layer around the room. And you're going to have to mark certain orbit locations to be able to understand where stars can be placed without colliding with another star. This shouldn't be too bad on the first set of stars. You should have some pretty easy markers, and the field is open at this point to be able to just deposit them. Where this becomes a problem is the second set of Galactic Smashes. You're guaranteed to have at least one star, I think, still on the field when this occurs. You're not going to be able to destroy all of the stars before the next Galactic Smash. So you're going to have to call out which orbit layer is no longer safe to be able to drop a Dark Star at, or you're going to have to drop the Dark Star at the opposite side of the orbit. You might be able to have 2 stars along the same orbit path as long as they're rotating in the same direction. To make that more complicated, every time Starkiller Nova occurs and destroys a Dark Star, all the other Dark Stars on the map begin rotating in the opposite direction. Finally, when you're shooting out the Starkiller swings to destroy the different dark stars around the map, if more than one of these misses a star, it will explode for massive raid-wide damage. So you cannot be missing your Starkiller swings at all during this phase. It is going to be utter chaos dodging all the constantly moving stars and dealing with them moving in different directions. It's also going to be quite the adjustment period while you're shooting out the Starkiller swings, making sure that they hit the stars. The star you're trying to aim at may change directions because of a previous star getting detonated by an earlier effect. You're going to have to quickly adjust your positioning to make sure to react to changes in your star's orbit pattern. There's just so much going on and so much wipe potential. So those are the different abilities of the bosses that we were able to test on the PTR for their Mythic changes, and I hope this guide helps you figure out how you're going to do your Mythic strategies to get your cutting edge achievement. I'm Zessie Fresh with Zaza Games, and we'll catch you guys next time.